On February 11, 2022, a fatal crash on the A46 near Leicester revealed a chilling conspiracy. Behind the deaths of Saqib Hussein and Mohammed Ijazuddin were not street gangs or hardened criminals. Instead, the perpetrators of this terrible crime were a wannabe social media star, her mother, and their 6 accomplices. This is the story of the Bukhari double murder case, a tale of obsession, blackmail, and the dark side of online fame. Let's get into it. Mahek Bukhari was originally born in the US but moved to the UK at the age of 3. Like any other teenager of her time, Mahek was active on every social media platform. Pretty, well put together, and fashionable, Mahek's always had a significant following, more so than her peers anyway. So when the budding beauty and fashion guru went to Manchester to study fashion and design, no one was surprised. But Mahek's following exploded the moment she turned 18, and by the time she finished her first course, she promptly dropped out to fully pursue a career as a social media influencer. And I've got to give it to her. Back in 2017, this wasn't the big industry that it is now. Well, it was big, but that was a year before TikTok exploded. And this was the beginnings of the influencers like Nikki Tutorials, James Charles, and Jaclyn Hill. The foundations that caked the way for hungry and passionate individuals like Mahek. Mahek wasn't James Charles huge, not even close, but she had a good enough baseline to work off of if she put in the right kind of marketing time and work into it. To exchange a university degree for the mere possibility of achieving success online for, let's face it, very rapid, surface-level reasons, well, I wouldn't exactly be proud of my kid. But Mahek's mother, Ansreen, wasn't just any parent. She was a middle-aged woman looking 40 in the eye. Her daughter was living every moment of her midlife crisis dreams. Ansreen championed Mahek's decisions, and she was along for the ride from the very start. When Mahek got big enough that she started receiving sponsorships, collaborations, free gifts, and paid for appearances at events, Ansreen was right there with her, partying 24/7 with kids half her age. Funny thing about Ansreen though, she was still married to Mahek's father, and yet she was dressing provocatively, dancing and drinking like she was a single 20-year-old. But she was the momager, so her presence at places she long since should have grown out of was accepted as Ansreen simply keeping an eye on her daughter and having a little fun while doing it. In 2019, they started having virtual get-togethers on the virtual video app Azar. It was actually a pretty good marketing ploy on Mahek's part. It was at the beginning of the COVID lockdowns, and the best friend mother-daughter duo had plenty of people tuning in to watch and interact with them. That's where 21-year-old Saqib Hussein saw them, and he messaged the older woman. A handful of messages soon turned into daily check-ins that led to meetups at parties, and soon they were meeting up at hotels in secret. This relationship went on for nearly 3 years, never truly out in the open. Saqib was absolutely head over heels for Ansreen, showering her with expensive gifts, and he was definitely more invested in the relationship than she was. He made no secret of his infatuation with the married woman to those around him. Even Mahek knew about her mother's dalliances on the side, but she too said nothing to her father about any of it. On the 10th of December 2021, Ansreen was tired of her boy toy, and the sneaking around was no longer as much fun as it had been in the beginning. They met at a hotel room in London where she broke things off, or at least tried to. Saqib spent the next few weeks obsessively calling Ansreen, posting pointed messages on Mahek's live streams if her mother was present, and he was slowly spiraling into obsessive rage when they ignored him. After hundreds of calls and hundreds more messages, Saqib turned nasty. The new year brought new ideas for him. If Ansreen was going to ignore him, then he'd give her a reason to listen. He threatened to release explicit videos and photos of their secret rendezvous at parties and hotels. And he wasn't just planning on sharing them with Ansreen's husband and her other children. He'd post them all over the internet, sinking Mahek's career in the process. Naturally, Ansreen was in a complete panic. Her entire life, her marriage, her relationships with her deeply religious family, everything was going to shatter around her. But Ansreen's hysteria was nothing compared to her daughter's reaction. Mahek wasn't just furious that her mother, who she loved more than anyone, was being threatened. She was absolutely fuming that anyone dared put her dreams in jeopardy. She'd gained over 100,000 followers on TikTok, 50,000 on Instagram, and 10,000 on YouTube. And with some serious sponsorships now starting to come in, well, 100,000 strangers were much too valuable to allow a scandal to bring her tiny little empire down. After a month of this back and forth with Mahek, even threatening to pay acquaintances to attack Saqib, Ansreen had finally had enough. She was going to go to the police, even if that meant exposing her affair to everyone. Saqib actually backed off when she made her plans known to him, but under one condition. If Ansreen paid him back the money he'd spent on her lavish gifts, then he'd leave them all alone. £3,000 is what he wanted, and then they'd be even. Mahek contacted another influencer and close friend called Rekan Karwan to act as their middleman to hand over the money. Rekan called up Saqib and told him to meet him in Luchborough in front of a Tesco superstore for the exchange. Saqib's sister overheard that phone call and warned him not to go. She was sure that he was being set up, and she was right. Mahek was sure that Saqib would take the money and release the damning videos anyway, so she orchestrated a plan to get Saqib alone, to take his phone, and to leave with their money intact. She'd roped in quite a number of people to orchestrate this whole thing, and they were all going to ambush Saqib once he got out of the car. Rekan contacted some of his own friends, some of whom were acquainted with Ansreen and Mahek, but most of them were completely unrelated to the mess until they agreed to go along for what they knew was going to be a pretty violent shakedown of a man that was a stranger to them. The 6 individuals were cousins, Rais and Amir Jamal, Sanaf Gula Mustafa, Mohammed Patel, and Natasha Akhtar. Mohammed Patel was new to the friend group and hadn't been with them during the discussions to pull this shakedown off. But on the night that they went out to commit the ultimate atrocity, he had no idea where they were even going until the rest of the group filled him in on the way to the parking lot, where they planned to lure Saqib to. The plan was to get Saqib there under the presence of receiving the £3,000. Then the group would flank him from 2 separate sides with their cars. When he got out of his car, they'd approach from both sides and overwhelm him with the power of numbers and force. Natasha owned a blue Seat Leon, and Mahek had a silver Audi TT. Rekan and Mohammed Patel got into Mahek's Audi with Mahek and Ansreen. Rekan took control of the vehicle, while the Jamal cousins and Sanaf got into Natasha's Leon, with Rais Jamal driving. Having no idea about the scheme going on to trap him, Saqib agreed to the exchange. Since he didn't drive, he asked a friend who did have a car to accompany him at 11 o'clock at night on the 9th of February. Mohammed Hashim Ajazuddin cut dinner with his family short to help out his friend. He had no involvement or even any idea what the situation was. He wasn't involved in this brewing disaster at all. Mohammed was just a guy who wanted to help a friend, and for his kindness, he'd be dead in less than 3 hours. Unfortunately, they drove to the wrong Tesco, but through Saqib and Mahek's messages and phone calls, he and Mohammed Ajazuddin finally found the right Tesco at 1 in the morning. When they arrived at the parking lot, Saqib and Mohammed immediately knew that something was terribly wrong. It's not sure if they saw the inordinate amount of strange people in the 2 separate cars, or if Saqib, who was on the phone with Mahek while they pulled in, heard someone on her end of the line. But whatever the case, they felt it necessary to hightail it out of there just seconds after they arrived. Both cars immediately sped after them. What started as an ambush plan had suddenly turned into a high-speed chase, with Mahek screaming over the phone that Saqib needed to pull over. When Saqib refused to willingly walk into a beating that could very well kill him, Mahek said that she was going to show him what she'd do to him. Saqib knew that his life was in danger then. This was no joke. Mahek and her companions were completely serious. He made a frantic call to 999, explaining that he was being chased by 2 cars with people wearing balaclavas. He rambled off his location as they were speeding down the highway, becoming more and more frantic with every second. Over the call, 999 operators could hear bangs. The people chasing them were ramming into Mohammed's car, actively trying to run them off the road. Then, Saqib could be heard screaming, followed by a deafening crash. The group hadn't just run them off the road, they'd forced them to bump the curb at 90 miles an hour, sending the entire vehicle spinning through the air. Muhammad and Saqib hit a tree next to the road, tearing the vehicle into two pieces, and then the wreckage burst into flames. Both men were dead upon impact. The group drove a mile up the road, got out just long enough to all turn their cell phones off and to check the damage to their precious cars. Then they drove back down and past the crash without ever stopping to check if the occupants were alive or to call for help. At 1 in the morning, that highway was almost completely deserted. The group believed they'd avoided any witnesses, but CCTV doesn't miss a thing. It took police only 3 hours to collect the multiple security footage from businesses and various traffic cameras, leading to the speedy identification of the owner of one of the cars and to make their first arrest. Natasha Akhtar was located, brought in, and just an hour later, a little before 6 o'clock in that morning, Mahek and Ansreen Bukhari were arrested too, and this whole house of cards crumbled around them. It took another week for police to locate the others to arrest them for the horrific double murder. Because that's exactly what it was. Murder. Pure and simple. Mohammed Patel, the newcomer to the group, was the only one to tell the truth in its completion during those first interrogations. The rest either flat out denied that they were even there or spun an elaborate tale of how they just witnessed a random crash and was so shocked that they didn't even think to call it in. Mahek straight up told investigators that the crash car was unfamiliar to her and that it was driving erratically from the start, putting her and her mother's lives in danger, and that they felt that they were fleeing for their lives. Much to the British population's displeasure, the trial was stalled due to a jury discrepancy, and all the defendants were allowed out on bail for several months. Once the trial was underway, every one of them tried to lie their way out of this disaster, each telling their own version of the story, all except Mohammed Patel. He told the truth since the very beginning, and his story was the only one that matched up with the plethora of CCTV footage and thousands of text messages that proved that the other 7 were lying through their teeth. Rakan Karwan and Rais Jamal, who were driving the cars that ran the 2 victims off the road, were each found guilty of 2 counts of murder. Rais received life with a minimum of 31 years. He got a few years extra due to a previous rape charge, so he should have been rotting behind bars long before getting into that car. Rakan also got life with a minimum of 26 years. Natasha, Sanaf, and Amir were all found guilty of manslaughter and received 14 years for the men and 11 for Natasha. Ansreen and Mahek both received life with 26 years minimum spent behind bars, but Mahek got 5 extra years added to her sentence since she was the one who collected the group, devised the plan, and was identified as the ringleader of this entire scheme. Only Mohammed Patel was acquitted of the crime. He was the only one who had no previous text messages or phone calls to prove that he was involved in any of the planning. He would have been found guilty of not reporting the crime, but since he told the truth from the very start, his charges were waived. 2 men who had the majority left of their lives to live, dead, all to protect a social media facade built on eyeshadow and TikTok dances. Vapid, conceited motives were what drove this entire tragedy, from the infidelity to the harassment, conspiring to commit an assault, and all the way to outright murder. What started off as a widely inappropriate affair ended in 2 men's death, fueled by the need to remain relevant on a platform that would have forgotten them all in less time than their prison sentences are. But now, I need to ask you, would this have happened if social media clout wasn't at stake? Many argue that this was simply a situation that got out of control and the people involved were unhinged long before subs and followers came into the picture. But I don't. I think the world's been led to believe that their lives are nothing outside of that small screen in your hand. They have forgotten that there's a life that should be lived in the real world, and when something puts that fake life in jeopardy, well, then the only solution becomes as make-believe as the life you've been selling to those who watch and like your videos. Only in the real world, you can't reinvent yourself. Here, death is final, and the consequences of your actions can't be avoided with an apology video. And now I'm about to be a total hypocrite, because I want those likes and subs too. Only here on Evidence Obscured, you're putting your support behind those that expose the murderers, not the ones who create them. See you in the next one. Cheers.